Last 2 Sundays, we spent time to read the stories of Easter from John's Gospel. And this morning we follow it through the one we have from Luke's Gospel. What we get from Luke's Gospel compared to the other 3 is by far the most extensive and extended account on this day of Easter. Luke does not seem to be in a hurry at all to move on from this day. He's giving a lot of attention to details on not only when and how Jesus appeared, but also on the disciples' reactions, how they felt and what they thought, and how they responded upon seeing the risen Christ. And I think it is wonderful to have all these details. As we begin our reflection on this passage we have from Luke's Gospel, I'd like to have an overview of his entire Easter account as we have in chapter 24. I believe that this chapter and having this overview of this chapter can help us in our reflection. And this chapter can be divided in 5 different parts. So please bear with me. I will just quickly go through them. First, we have the early morning account of Jesus' tomb being empty. And later on this same day, Jesus joins the other 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. And they only recognize Jesus when he breaks bread and breaks open their hearts. And I love the way they describe the experience of being with the risen Christ. They say, "Were not our hearts burning within us when he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" So it must have been Jesus, they conclude. And when they realize this, they run. They run all the way back to Jerusalem to tell their friends. And later, still on the same day, just about the time for supper, Jesus meets all of them back in Jerusalem, which is the passage we have this morning. And did you know that there's actually another Jesus' appearance which quite easily goes unnoticed? Before Jesus meets these 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, he first appears to Simon Peter. How do we know? We know it because that's what the rest of the disciples tell these 2 when they come back from the road to Emmaus. They tell them, yes, the Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon already. That's what they say. We don't know anything about this encounter, about where and how Jesus appears to Peter on this day. It remains only known by Peter and perhaps his close friends with whom he shared his experience. And perhaps this would be the most unknown encounter of the risen Christ recorded in the Bible. And after telling all these, Luke then ends his gospel with the attention, Jesus' final farewell. So this is what we have in Luke's gospel. And let's dive in to our passage, shall we? In our passage, there's a single verse that I think summarizes this whole chapter and what we can draw so much from. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, Jesus said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" One of the things that Luke tells us again and again all throughout his account on this day is the fact that even after all that had happened, the disciples still did not believe. In spite of all that happened and the numerous occasions that Jesus appeared to them, to one person, to Peter, or to a pair of them on the road to Emmaus, or to all of them back in Jerusalem, they still disbelieved. And I must say that I actually love the way that Luke gives his account. For John, in contrast, the way he tells the story in his gospel, as we reflected in the past 2 weeks, everything is quite snappy and quick. It happens there and then. Easter witness, Great Commission, Pentecost, they happen as Jesus comes. Thomas, despite his initial doubts, is able to see and believe Jesus, as Lynn shared in her sermon last week. He calls Jesus my Lord and my God, his wonderful confession of his faith. So for John, everything is so dramatic. And I love it too, don't get me wrong. Well, that's how I often wish that life was dramatic and exciting. For Luke, the disciples' face upon seeing the risen Christ is still a work in progress, something in the pipeline. Surely it is in the making, but still far from being firm or strong. So when the disciples see Jesus, Luke tells us their minds are filled with so many emotions. They are startled, amazed, terrified, and frightened, and doubts and questions arise in their hearts, and they think they were seeing a ghost. So for Luke, the risen Christ and that powerful message of life overcoming death, and even when Jesus is standing right there in front of them, it is still hard to take in, accept, and believe. And that's perhaps because they were the disciples, and we are today in the same way. We are so used to the life without resurrection, the limitations of death, the pain and paucity of life in this world, especially so today, after the year of isolation and the year of losing so many lives due to the pandemic. But Luke tells us that the disciples disbelieved what they were seeing. But that's not the end of the story. Certainly not the way Luke describes these moments of disbelief and wonder on this Easter day. And here comes another reason why I think this verse is so important. That still within their disbelief, Luke tells us that they experience joy in their heart. Or rather, more precisely, the way Luke puts it, while in their joy, they still carried disbelief and wondered in their hearts. And still on this phrase, I think it becomes even clearer, and I would say quite interesting and even exciting if we take on a more literal translation from the original text, and that would be, they do not believe it for joy and amazement. So that's what we have, and it is really down to your interpretation of what this means. And I say this because I have checked so many translations on this phrase, and they tend to disagree with each other. We haven't got time to go through all of them this morning, but amongst them, I think the NIV and ISV Bible are quite close to this literal translation. The NIV Bible puts it, they do not believe it because of joy and amazement. And the ISV takes it even further in translating this phrase. They are skeptical due to their joy and astonishment. Can you see the difference that this could make and the possibility that this would open up in our understanding of what was really happening in the disciples' hearts on this day? This could tell us that Luke is telling us that even in these moments of doubts, wonder and fear, The disciples could not believe that their hearts were filled with joy, that they were astonished for this sudden joy being flooded into their hearts. When Jesus came to them, one thing they remembered was they were astonished by this bursting out of the joy from their hearts. They couldn't believe it because it was too good to be true. And isn't this wonderful? And isn't this great? What should we call it? Should we call it a joyful disbelief? Disbelief with joy, or disbelief for joy? I don't know, and that's why I think we have struggled to translate this passage into English so much. But I think still this makes perhaps one of the best Easter messages I've ever read from the Bible. That the risen Christ, when he comes, does not only offer his peace, but despite all that we carry in our hearts, he gives us his joy. And here comes perhaps my favorite part of our story today. As Jesus comes, he says, "Have you anything to eat?" Well, this wonderful and quirky sense of humor, an affirmation that his presence is not a vision or illusion, but a real presence. So how do we experience the risen Christ today? Luke's answer is that Jesus is with us now, wherever we are. We may not always notice him. We may not fully understand the way he's present with us, but he is with us. Around our dinner table, in our conversation with our friends, in our daily walks, as he did to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, and even when we are alone, deep in our thoughts and in our solitude, like he came to Simon Peter. Jesus still comes, Luke affirms, and fills our hearts with his unbelievable and too good to be true joy. Finishing my message here today, a couple of weeks ago, I received a phone call from one of the members in my church. And we were catching up on the phone with one another, and she had been admitted to the hospital after having a fall at home. And it was a few days after she returned to home that we talked on the phone. And we talked about our family, how they've been doing, and we also spent time in prayer on the phone. I must admit that as much as I intend to give a pastoral support when I speak to my members, I often find that it is them giving me their pastoral support when they speak to their minister. And I'm grateful for all your prayers and the care that I receive. But it was what she said to me just before we finished our conversation on the phone that really touched me on that day, and also helped me to prepare my sermon this morning. I actually had written what she said to me then, so I'm going to read it from the note I made. She says, "It's really hard to explain, but the reason I really wanted to speak to you today is the fact that there has been so much joy in my heart in the last couple of days. And you know, I'm still in a pickle." Well, this is her favorite phrase and the one that I have learned from her. She often say in our conversation, "Kido, you know, I'm in a pickle." But she continued to say, "But isn't that wonderful that I have joy in my heart? I can't believe it. I have it." What better story of Easter can there be? Friends, the promise of Easter is Jesus still being with us in all the moments of our life, even in those moments when we feel we are in a pickle. Jesus comes and still fills our hearts with His peace and His joy. So what are you having for dinner today? Whatever you have, remember the risen Christ is there with you. And may your dinner time filled with joy that Jesus gives. And you will be also able to share that joy with those around the table and those beyond. God help us. Amen.